If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who explore deep woods, abandoned places, creepy forests, etc. What's the scariest thing you saw out there? I explored an abandoned factory near my partner's house. It was me, my partner, and my stepdad. We were picking up my partner from their house when we passed by the building. Me and my partner mentioned wanting to explore it, and my stepdad, who is like us and acts on impulse, parked near the building, and we found a way in. The first weird thing we noticed was how cold the building was. It was the middle of summer, and as soon as we went through the first doorway, it felt like it was winter. Keep in mind that most of the walls were broken down, so it's not like it was just a cold, damp place. No, it was completely open. We just went through the doorway because there was debris blocking the broken walls. While my partner and stepdad were peeking through another doorway that led further into the building, I was looking through random files and cabinets there. Everything looked like it had just been dropped. I found worker IDs, important files, order files, and other things in there. My stepdad pointed out that a lot of the orders in the back were packed and ready to be shipped, but many dated from the late 1990s to the early 2000s, so this place wasn't closed for too long when we went in. It was about 2018, yet it looked as if it had been abandoned for over 2 decades at that point. But then again, I don't know how building deterioration works. As we were talking about how weird the place was, I got this really weird feeling, that danger, fight, or flight kind of feeling. I don't know how else to explain it, but anyway, I told them about it, and we agreed to leave. Once back in the car and driving away, me and my partner noticed something in the doorway we just left. It looked kind of human but not quiet. The best I can explain is something out of the uncanny valley. Just human enough to pass, but something is clearly off about it. We've never gone back to it, and my partner currently lives somewhere else, but I always get that weird feeling when driving past the building. I live on a golf course surrounded by wooded areas in a small town in North Carolina. Me and my friends thought we were some badass kids riding bikes around our neighborhood. We saw an opening that leads into one of the many forests, and we decided to explore it. Leading into the woods was a little bridge covered by trees. Once you get to the end of the bridge, there's a big tree to the right of us. Keep this tree in mind. The tree was a healthy oak tree, and the bark was fresh, almost like it had just been planted and trimmed recently. Surrounding that patch of woodsy area was a barbed wire pretty sketch, but we didn't care at the time. After we saw it ended, we left and didn't think much of it. We decided to go back 2 weeks later, and we saw that tree, and the bark had been ripped clean off and claw marks were running up the tree, which was about 8 feet tall. We decided to find a way to maneuver the barbed wire to go deeper inside the woods. As we were walking on, I had a weird feeling that we were being watched or followed. About 15 minutes later, we were heading back towards the bridge when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I looked to my left, and it was something white running through a field, but that field was filled with broken limbs, leaves, grass, etc. But we heard nothing break after I saw that white figure. We bolted out of there, probably pissed off all our pants. We never went back to those woods. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places and ghost stories. So, when I heard about an old, run-down house on the outskirts of town that was supposedly haunted, I knew I had to check it out. It was a warm summer night when I finally gathered the courage to go. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the overgrown grass and dilapidated fence surrounding the property. As I approached the house, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. The windows were boarded up, the porch was sagging, and the front door hung off its hinges. I hesitated for a moment before entering, but my curiosity got the better of me. The inside was just as decrepit as the outside. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls, the floors were creaky, and there was a layer of dust covering everything. It was like stepping back in time. As I made my way through the house, I started to hear strange noises. At first, it was just the creaking of the old floorboards under my feet. But then I heard something that sounded like a whisper. I froze, trying to listen for any further sounds. That's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing there. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in the house. I tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't budge. It was like it was stuck shut. I started to panic, feeling trapped in this haunted house with whatever was lurking in the shadows. Then, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was deliberately trying to creep up on me. I knew I had to get out of there. I made my way upstairs and saw a figure in the distance. It was hard to make out any details, but it seemed to be wearing an old-fashioned dress. It turned and looked right at me, and I could see that it had no face. Just an empty void where its features should be. I screamed and ran as fast as I could, finally managing to force the front door open. I stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. I don't know what happened in that house, but I know that I will never forget the terror I felt that night. And I will never go back there again. I usually go on long runs in the forest, mainly to be in tune with nature and to exercise. I've seen lots of wild animals, abandoned cabins, staircases, and everything in between on my runs. But until a couple years ago, I found this piano deep in the forest. No head trail to it, drag marks, or anything. It seemed like it appeared from nowhere. And this was super deep in the forest too. My reaction was that it looked beautiful, and it was almost in perfect condition. I couldn't find any company name on it, so probably it was handmade. I really wanted to know the backstory of this piano and how it ended up here. It was just standing there under a birch tree, like it had recently spawned. But it's made of wood, so it's back with its friends now. I tried playing it, and funny enough, it was in perfect tune. I went back to it a couple of times. A couple of times turned into a dozen times. It sounded so beautiful in the forest. The forest has such cool acoustics. I never really reacted to the fact that it was still in good condition. Either someone is actively servicing it or it's a really good built piano. But one day I could swear I heard someone playing it too. When I arrived at the spot, no one was there. If a piano is in a forest and no one plays it, does it make a sound? I felt like somebody was watching me. After that time, I actually never went back to it. But it wasn't until very recently that I heard some stories about more people finding abandoned pianos deep in the forest. All over the world. And they found them really deep in the woods. I looked it up on the web and found a couple theories. If you play the right notes, it will open another dimension, or if you play it, you will get cursed for life. The piano did look a bit cursed, but at the same time beautiful. But I found this strangely disturbing old Swedish myth. If you ever find a piano in the woods, do not play it. If you play it, you will come back to it again and again. You'll basically become obsessed. And the funny thing is, I've already played it a couple dozen times, so I guess I'm obsessed. What's weirding me out is that this piano only looks abandoned. I really felt like somebody was there with me at some times. These pianos should go out of tune really quickly when put in this environment. And who even manages to drag a piano so deep? They're super heavy. They are surprisingly difficult to get rid of. No one wants them, and they're rather unwieldy to move. And who even was that person I heard playing it? Growing up, I loved to hike and venture out. I'm currently a regular 25-year-old. I thought I knew the woods, inside and out. But after what happened, I'm not sure. I was planning on hiking longer this time. I just got out of a relationship, so I was pretty stressed. I arrived there. I got everything I needed as I wandered into the woods. The sound of the birds chirping calmed me somehow. I got hungry pretty quickly. I pulled out one of my vitamin bars and munched on it. I checked my watch, and it read 7:36. I nodded to myself as I continued to wander deeper into the woods. I saw couples laughing as they walked past me. I got dark quick. It seems as if I was daydreaming, and then I heard it. Loud hysterical laughter, extremely loud. I questioned it because I've never heard it before. It was then a quick 20-second pause, and then I heard a male and female scream. I got a chill. They sounded absolutely frightened. I began to jog back to where my car was parked, and that was pretty far. I then leave, crunching behind me and hearing the sound of a brute-like person chasing me. Whoever was chasing me was wheezing loudly. It sounded big, but I didn't understand how it was keeping up with me. That's when I glanced at it. It was a giant. I can't get the horrendous sight out of my mind. It had large, overgrown hands, and it ran on all fours. It had no eyes, just black blood dripping from its eye sockets. Its mouth was unnaturally large, and its ears were large. It seemed attracted to sound. I halted, then dropped into the leaves. It began sniffing around. I then heard some other people running, and then the thing chased after them. I then heard flesh being torn apart, with the following screams of agony. I took the time to stand and walk slowly, definitely not wanting to make much noise. After about 20 minutes of walking, I made it to my car. I hit my nose incredibly hard on the ground when I fell. This happened almost 2 years ago, and I haven't been in the woods since. I know that thing is still lurking out there. I had always loved hiking, and I had heard that there was a beautiful trail deep in the woods that led to a hidden waterfall. So, I packed my backpack and set out early in the morning, eager to explore. The trail was steep and narrow, but the scenery was breathtaking. The sun filtered through the trees, casting a dappled light on the forest floor. The air was cool and fresh, and the sound of the birds singing filled my ears. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, I started to feel like I was being watched. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But the unease grew stronger, and soon I found myself looking over my shoulder every few minutes. Then, as I reached a bend in the trail, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the clearing ahead of me was a figure dressed in a long black coat, their face obscured by a hood. I froze, uncertain of what to do. The figure didn't move, but I could sense that it was watching me. Panic set in, and I started to back away slowly, hoping that the figure wouldn't follow. But as I turned to leave, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I started to run, my heart pounding with fear. I could hear the figure pursuing me, its footsteps growing louder and closer. I ran blindly through the woods, not sure where I was going or how to get out. The figure was still chasing me, it was breathing heavily and laboring. I knew that I was in serious trouble. Just as I thought that all was lost, I stumbled upon a group of hikers who were on their way back from the waterfall. They saw the terror in my eyes and quickly realized that I was in danger. They helped me to safety, and we called the police. The police arrived quickly and conducted a search of the area, but they found no sign of the figure in the black coat. They assured me that I was safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching me. For weeks after the incident, I had nightmares about the figure in the woods. I couldn't get the image of the long black coat and the hooded face out of my head. I stopped hiking for a while, afraid that I would encounter the figure again. But eventually, I realized that I couldn't let my fear control me. I started hiking again, but this time I made sure to bring a friend with me. And while I never did see the figure in the black coat again, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stumbled upon that group of hikers. I've always been fascinated by abandoned buildings, so when I heard about an old hospital on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to explore it. I convinced a few friends to come with me, and we set off one night to see what we could find. The hospital was even creepier than we had imagined. It was completely dark inside, and the air was musty and thick. We explored the first few floors, snapping photos and making jokes to lighten the mood. But as we descended deeper into the building, things started to feel off. We heard strange noises coming from the walls, and the temperature dropped suddenly. It was as if the building was alive and didn't want us there. We tried to leave, but we found that the doors were locked. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped inside. As we frantically searched for a way out, we came across a room that looked like it had been recently used. There were strange symbols etched into the walls, and a foul odor hung in the air. It was then that we saw something move out of the corner of our eyes. We turned to face it, and what we saw will haunt us forever. It was a figure, tall and dark, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare right through us. We tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It chased us through the halls, getting closer and closer with each passing moment. Just when we thought we were done, we stumbled upon an old service entrance. We burst through the doors and into the night, running as fast as we could away from the hospital. When we finally caught our breath, we turned back to see the hospital bathed in an eerie glow, as if it were alive and watching us. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that hospital. But one thing's for sure, I'll never go back there again. A buddy of mine and I were exploring an old factory that was shut down for poisoning the water supply in the area 30 years ago. The area was contaminated with lead, and the factory was left pretty much unchanged aside from being partially gutted of machines. Inside the maintenance/locker room area, there was a long hallway with doors to various rooms. It was pitch black inside, even in broad daylight. We navigated the corridors with flashlights. The air smelled of mold and felt cold and damp, but the ground was dry and dusty. The lead paint was peeling off the ceiling, and the thick flakes of paint hanging from it looked like the room had been feathered. A lot of the flakes had fallen off and littered the floor. They made a satisfying crunch as we crept through. Inside one of the rooms, there was a sliver of light bleeding out of an old double door and spilling into the hallway. Naturally, this caught our attention, and we eased inside. The light turned out to be sunlight as these doors lead outside. The room was their laundry room. I assume it was for uniforms. There was a huge dryer still in there that we ventured one of us could fit in. I volunteered and climbed in. To my surprise, it still spun freely, as the bearings had remained in good health throughout the years. I braced myself and told my buddy to try spinning it. I thought I could survive a few revolutions unscathed. We spent a few minutes taking turns spinning around in this big dryer. Being teenagers, this was as much fun as we had hoped for in this creepy old factory. My turn had come around again, and just as I had begun to rock back and forth, gaining momentum, I looked to my buddy for the extra push, but he didn't help. His demeanor had instantly changed. He was pale, almost shaking, distracted, and looked like he had seen a ghost. Shh, stop, he whispered in panic. What? WTF is the matter? Listen. Do you hear that? I hurried out of the dryer before coming to complete silence and lending an ear. From the pitch-black corridor comes a familiar sound from only moments ago. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the paint chips on the ground getting crunched very slowly. Someone or something was creeping towards us in the pitch-black catacomb-like hallways of this decrepit factory. We had been everywhere in the factory, and not a soul or even a small animal was to be seen. The footsteps did not slow down or speed up, but they were getting louder. Crunch, crunch. We both looked at each other in disbelief and utter terror. Who could this be? What could this be? And why are they sneaking up on a cacophony of creaking dryers and laughter, the pitch-black unknown? There was no time to entertain these questions. I turned to the double doors from where the sunlight was leaking and heaved myself onto them. They gave out an awful noise amidst the temporary silence and crackling of paint, but it didn't budge. My buddy joined in, and finally they started to give way. We resorted to kicking them for the final blow, and they burst open. I had never been so happy to see sunlight, dead grass, and rusty fences in my life. We bolted, never looking back, never going back, and never knowing what we could have encountered in that wretched, dark, and creepy corridor. About 15 years ago, my boyfriend and I were looking for a spot to fool around, so we went to a nearby construction site. We noticed the road kept going past the construction site into the woods. So we followed the road, and there was an abandoned house at the end of it. The next day I went back in the daylight with a buddy and we saw that there was a second abandoned house further back. The first house was easy to get into and had nothing particularly interesting in it. The second house was boarded up. I'll call my buddy Jill. Jill and I finally managed to break some boards on the back window. Then we used the broken boards to break the window. We crawled into the window. Once we got in, we pushed a chair up to the window we'd come in from so we could get out without cutting ourselves. Then we turned around and saw that the walls were covered with spray paint, saying things like "kill yourself, they're coming," and "die." We assumed other teenagers had done it. The kitchen had tons of smashed dishes. The furniture in the house looked like an axe had been taken to most of it. Then we came to a room with an extremely detailed map of our town drawn on the walls. It looked like it was from the 1970s due to certain labels on stores. The map had people's names on houses and the words "good" or "bad" after them. After that room, we decided to head out. We walked back into the living room, and behind the chair we had pushed up to the window, the wall now had spray paint saying "get out of my house," which was definitely not there when we had pushed the chair there at the beginning. I ripped my pants on the window. I was so terrified while trying to get the duck out of there. There is an old Quaker cemetery in the middle of a park in New York. It is basically abandoned and has a 9-foot fence all around the perimeter. My friends and I decided to climb into the cemetery using a large tree branch that overhung the fence, then drop down into the cemetery. We gathered up a bunch of beer and smokables, and in we went. We were partying for an hour or so when one of the guys said, "Look at those dogs looking at us." About 100 yards away, there were 6 or 7 big dogs eyeballing us. Slowly, at first, we got up and walked towards where we came in. Then somebody ran, and it was on. The dogs were after us. One by one, we had to climb the fence and grab the branch up and over. The last image I had of them was of them working through very tall grass to find us. We just made it, and they barked at us from their side of the fence. Never went back. This happened to me when I was about 12 years old. I was at my grandmother's house playing with my cousins. My grandmother lived deep in the woods at that time, so a favorite pastime of ours was to explore the woods, picking wild blackberries and eating them as we went. I was with 2 of my cousins, we'll call them Sarah and Caleb. Sarah was my age, and her brother Caleb was just a year younger. We walked further than we ever had, breaking our grandmother's rule to not stray further than she could see, but she was inside anyway, and we were dumb kids. After about 30 minutes of walking or running, I noticed the woods were eerily silent now. It had somehow happened gradually enough to not spook us with the sudden change, but it still felt wrong. To me, at least, if Sarah and Caleb felt the same, they didn't say it. Shortly after I noticed the silence, we came to a clearing in the woods. It looked like something out of a storybook. The sun was coming in through the trees and around grass that was just a little too green and looked enticingly soft. The kind of grass you'd want to feel on your bare feet or even lay down in for a while. That in and of itself is weird because this was a very sandy area. Grass didn't really grow well here, and when it did, it was scratchy and brown. But aside from that, this grass didn't look wild, it looked like a manicured lawn, like someone was coming and cutting and watering it regularly. But the closest house was our grandmother's, no one else was around, and if they were, who would take the time and effort to tend to a patch of grass in the middle of the woods. Aside from the grass, there were butterflies just floating around and scattered flowers. It looked and felt like a completely different place juxtaposed with the dry, sandy woods, like the type of place where everything that grows there is either dry and brown, covered in thorns, or both. It looked like something meant to entice and make you want to stay. We were all three good Christian kids raised not to believe in anything besides Jesus and the Bible, but we could just tell we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't walk beyond the trees and into this clearing. We ran. No discussing it, just all three of us turned and ran as fast as we could. The weirdest thing was that it took us 30 minutes to get there. We were energetic kids having fun, so it's not like we were taking our sweet time walking there, but within a minute we were stumbling back into our grandmother's yard. We ran to get my older brother, 15 at the time, and show him, but the place just vanished. Did not exist anymore. I wasn't young enough to have imagined it and convinced myself it was real, and I have two witnesses with the same story. Also, a fun little fact about this place, my grandmother told us when she first moved to this place to never answer a voice we recognized if that person shouldn't be around, especially if they use our name. She also set up code words with Sarah and Caleb, she was raising them at the time, to use in case we don't think one of us really is one of us. There are these woods. I go to my living partner, and with this one part, I always feel great tension. Almost every time we pass that part of the woods, something strange happens. One time I heard demonic-like voices, and part of it was whispered directly into my ear. Right after that, my so immediately said, "Let's get out of here," and he isn't the type to get scared. Other times, we felt like we were being watched or followed near that location. A few hours ago, he saw a really big white thing. I didn't see it, but when I walked to the center of the activity, I got heart palpitations. I moved a few feet away, and it stopped. He said it was a big and formless white thing that jumped away into the trees. I didn't see anything move, but if anything had jumped into the bushes, it would have been audible, and twigs would have moved. The whole way home, he had a look on his face like he was trying to manage what he saw. I really wonder if there's a portal there, or maybe it's just a hotspot of activity. Either way, there's something strange about this spot in these woods, and it part proves to me that there's much more to the world than we can see. Some background. I'm a 37-year-old female, and he is a male. We are urban explorers and hikers and sometimes go into abandoned buildings, even in ones said to be haunted. We never felt or saw anything, not even in abandoned psych wards. These woods are where we go hiking. So me and my friends decided to go to a park near their place around 9 o'clock p.m. When we get there, one of my friends mentions that there's a place where people do witchcraft or rituals. Being intrigued and not superstitious prior to this event, I agreed and wanted to explore the densely wooded area of the park. Upon exploring for a bit, we came across a patch or circle with plants and stones surrounding it. We initially thought nothing of it and took photos, until all three of us heard two loud footsteps behind us. Keep in mind there was no way for any person to enter that area because we were on a steep hill with only one path to get up at that time, and we ran out of there. When we stopped to catch our breath, we turned around to see if whatever it was following us, and when we did, we saw a black, lanky figure following us slowly, and we ran out of the park. It wasn't me seeing things because all three of us saw it at the time. The following is my account of what occurred in the woods while exploring a couple days ago. After lots of frustrating research, I haven't come any closer to explaining my experience. On Tuesday afternoon, I decided to take advantage of the nice weather and go for a little hike or walk. I wanted to explore a nature preserve I had only previously explored briefly. This nature preserve happened to be nestled between a cemetery, church or school, and mental health hospital. After about 30 minutes of uneventful walking in the woods, I came across a slightly developed area. Tucked down a hill and in the middle of the forest, I was shocked to find a paved area and a couple isolated concrete walls. A feeling of adventure and discovery took over, and I instantly became excited to explore. When I stepped close to the paved area, things started to change. I started to feel a little uneasy, but I didn't pay much attention to it. When I made it to the paved area, I became confused. There was an empty metal chair sitting in the middle of the clearing on the concrete. Part of me was fascinated, as I thought this looked cool and creepy. I snapped a quick picture too to capture the moment. After staring for a minute, I decided to investigate the chair. However, I again got an uneasy feeling when I got closer to the chair. Due to this, I decided it would be best not to explore that area today. I slowly turned and began to walk off as I quietly said, "This place is creepier than I remembered." This is when my experience occurred. Almost like someone responding to me, I heard a loud and direct "Nobody likes it here." I quickly whipped around to scan for the person. Based on the voice, it would have been about a 5-8-year-old boy. However, When I turned around, there was nobody to be found. The likely explanation would have been some kid just playing in the woods. This doesn't add up, though. There was only one path in and out of the area, and I was standing on it. I also didn't see another person the whole time I was there. The absence of parents or any real route in or out suddenly hit me. My concern quickly changed to fear. I took a last look, only to see nothing, before I started sprinting up the path and out of the woods. I eventually caught my breath, but I still had no explanation. Even after I heard the voice, there was no movement that I would have expected to hear from a person. I've never had anything close to a paranormal encounter before and I've always been pretty skeptical. However, now I don't know what to think. I can't rationalize the voice or situation at all. Historical research hasn't given me any special leads. Me and some friends recently visited an abandoned nursing home. We found all kinds of cool old stuff, and it was really interesting walking around there. We took a spirit box with us to see if we could get any interaction with ghosts. We were standing in a dark, empty room, putting all our lights out, and turning on the spirit box. We made contact with multiple people, we asked them questions, and they responded. I had never talked to ghosts before, so this was really special for me. There were a lot of voices. We kept talking to them until we heard a very loud bang from upstairs. We were startled, and our first reaction was to turn everything off and stay silent for a while. After some time, it was still quiet, so we moved on, exploring the rest of the building, until later. Again, a very loud bang from upstairs. We again kept quiet and waited, but at this point, it began to be really scary. We went upstairs, and we saw a big blood splatter against the wall. At this point, we knew maybe it was time to go, so we were slowly heading back. Until we stood in front of a big closed door, and right when we wanted to open it, a loud noise came directly from the other side of the door. So we ran as fast as we could to the nearest exit. We had to crawl through a hole in the wall to exit the building. As we were outside, we looked up to the floor where we heard the noise, and we saw something that looked like a shadow standing in the opening of a hole in the wall, but it was hard to see since it was dark outside. To this day, I am really curious about what was behind that door, but maybe it is better I never found out. I was a dumb duck as a kid, I did a lot of ridiculous shit. But in this encounter, just let me tell you, I learned my lesson about breaking into places that really should be left alone. It was in the middle of the summer, and me and my friends sat on a wooden fence, smoking cigarettes, thinking about what the hell to do with ourselves. One of my friends suggested an abandoned hospital up the road from my house. We were unsure at first, as we'd heard a lot of stories from people who had previously gone years ago before it was boarded up again. After much discussion, we went. It was boarded up with wood nailed to the windows, and the doors were sealed shut, so there was no way we could have gotten in that way. We were going to walk away and just go home, but luckily I remembered I had something at home that I could get the boards off with. As we climbed through the window, we finally got in. It was like going through a time warp. The place wasn't heavily damaged, and the interior looked like it was from the 1970s or 1960s. There were still stale, bloody towels there too. It was eerie as hell. Anyway, we fooled around and freaked each other out for a few hours until we had to go. Before we left, we fished around with a fire extinguisher that had been left there. While everyone was in the center of the hospital, I stepped out for a breather in the hallway with the window we entered through. I was at the bottom of the hallway, and I saw a pale, slender figure in a blue hospital gown climb out the window while looking at me. He looked tired and sick. I froze and screamed. I left as soon as it appeared. I will never forget how freaky it was. This happened in January of 2016, when I was in my late teens. But this story keeps coming up amongst my friend group, and something about it kind of bugs me. I have no clue what I really saw, I just know it seemed paranormal and not explainable. So, I live about 2 hours away from an abandoned campus that was used as both a tuberculosis hospital and an asylum until about the 1990s. I didn't really research it, nor did I believe in the paranormal at the time. I just thought that it would be so cool to go to an abandoned place. So I brought my 2 guy friends, one my age who was into the paranormal and had been there before, and one older than us, and my 1 girlfriend. I'm also a girl. It's one of those places that you'd get in trouble for trespassing at, so we hid my car and snuck in through a broken fence. I should mention we went at around 8 or 9 p.m., so it was dark out. We go into the main building and are fine, we're not feeling weird or anything. We exit that building and go into another that's maybe 2 buildings away, but within a couple of minutes we end up at the exact place we exited the first building, the main entrance, and that felt a little off. So, we decide to venture to the basement. My girlfriend and I feel uneasy immediately and suggest we go upstairs instead, which we do. We go up into the place where they kept children. This was evident because there were all the children's toys on the ground, and there was a soundproof room. Some of the toys were moving, and there was a ball that was bouncing. Our friend who's been there stopped us while we were walking through a hallway. We heard a door slam and footsteps in front of us. The hallway in front of us was also pitch black, while the rear of the hall was at least lit up a little by the moon. We turned around and went back. We were standing in the center of the room together, and around us, it was almost like a haze was there. I felt so sick and lightheaded. I had dread in the pit of my stomach, and so did my friends. We felt like we were surrounded by other people. We quickly went back upstairs. This is when it gets extremely unsettling. We go into the ballroom and grab a table. We sit on it, each of us on an end. It was square. We heard a door slam shut, so I looked up at the ceiling to avoid looking around the room. My friend, who's into the paranormal, starts trying to communicate with whatever's in the room. He said to knock once if you're a boy and twice if you're a girl, and we heard one knock. As this is happening, I see a black figure that's almost human looking sitting on the windowsill. It's kind of hunched over and very tall looking. Its leg is swinging, and then it takes off. It's crawling across the ceiling. I tug on my other guy's arm, and he shakes his head as to not acknowledge it, and I try to forget it. My girlfriend says out loud, "Do you guys see?" But my guy friend, who was ignoring it, cuts her off and says, "Stop." My guy friend, who was trying to communicate with this thing, told it to come sit down. We felt the air get freezing, and that's when he said, "We have to go, goodbye, you are not to follow us out." We all jumped up off the table and walked out. After we were out, we practically ran to the car and left super fast. As soon as I was in the car, I felt so much better physically. In the car, we were silent for a while, but then my friend, who was ignoring the figure, said, "Did you guys see it?" And we all said yes and shared our experiences. He thanked my girlfriend and me for getting the message and ignoring it as much as possible. It still freaks me out to this day. I always get chills writing or talking about it. The amount of energy needed to manifest that is what boggles my mind most. I'm not even completely sure what we saw, and as much as we discuss, we can't come to a solid conclusion. Was this maybe demonic? What else could this even be? I was 10 years old. Back then, my friends and I would ride our bikes as far as we could, looking for adventure or to discover something new and exciting. At this time, my community was a mix of new and old, and it was easy to find an old tunnel, the remains of a farmhouse, or decayed paths and trails. We set out that summer day with one more boy than the usual crew. I had not formally met him yet. Nonetheless, we headed out on our bikes. We came across an abandoned house near a farmer's field and forest. We started to explore the premises, and we decided to settle here for a while. We walked in, checked things out, and were just hanging out and sharing our findings. I started to hear the sound of rocks or gravel being moved through water, like a slurry, emanating from the basement. I thought it was my friends playing in the house. I briefly ignored this. Suddenly there was wailing, and the sound of gravel was getting louder, like thrashing, like someone was throwing rocks or gravel. Frozen. There was no way my friends could make that noise. Quiet, fast talk surrounded us. My one friend started to cry uncontrollably. His brother, a warrior-type kid, was preparing to protect his brother. Together, we could see inside the house's front hall and stairwells. The new boy was giggling and gesturing for us to come downstairs by waving us in with his hand. We stood there dumbfounded. How or what? How did he not know the immediate danger we were in, that he was in? I wanted to get him, as I thought this was possibly his last moment on Earth. But I watched him return from the dark stairwell leading to the basement. He was still giggling and mirroring the exact same motion when he returned downstairs and out of sight. We screamed at him. But he kept doing the exact same thing over and over again. He was actually speeding up. The noises from the basement, which I can only describe as pure despair, had an agonizing, painful, and doom-like quality, but they were human, or at least human-like. We screamed at the boy that we were leaving, and it seemed like he was coming outside. Frantic, we just started biking as fast as possible, petrified with fear. I couldn't look back. It was dusk now, and we had no time to reconvene. We separated immediately and went home before we were grounded. I asked my friends the next day if anyone saw the other boy. They responded that they thought he was someone else's friend from our group. We didn't even know his name or where he came from, and we never saw him again. I live in Serbia close to Belgrade. I have been living here for some years now, but there is something strange in the woods near my house. Almost 3 years ago my friend and I made a discovery in the same woods while we were hanging out. The floor/path changes shapes and directions in those woods. The forest also appears like it's making time go faster. We were in there for 10 to 15 minutes top, and when we got out an hour had passed. But to get to the point of the thing, my friends and I have made some expeditions there and we saw things we described as the same: tall, 2 to 10 meters, to shorter, 180 centimeters shorter on 4 legs. Everybody described it as humanoid looking, long face, no visible mouth, skin grayish/black/fleshy, eyes were spaced apart. It either talks, whispers, screams and mimics voices. Only one encounter was aggressive where I felt it choke me. It mostly observes and tracks us. It does not get out of the woods, unknown. Throughout all the expeditions it felt when we were getting out like it was an endless maze of barricades made from wood that wasn't there before. I have a need to explore the whatever it is more. It's like I'm attracted towards the woods sometimes, like I need to enter. My mom lived in a house that was surrounded by random patches of condensed forest, and as a resident of Minnesota, that's pretty common in most neighborhoods. Anyway, when I was around 7 or so, I would always explore the forest, and I would sometimes use it as a shortcut to the cub foods I lived by, but I remember one day me and my sister encountered some portal-looking thing in the distance. It was very strange because it was just a square showing a cloudy sky. I was super confused as it looked as if I could just walk through into it. I always remembered it ever since that day and just assumed it could perhaps be a mirror. But a question still stuck in my mind. How could a mirror that was facing me only show the sky and not even a fraction of my reflection? As I said earlier, this is a condensed forest with tall pine trees, yet all I saw in that square was the clouds, and as I could recall, the sky looked as if it was a different time than where I was at the moment. It looked as if it was dusk, yet it was not even noon yet when I went to play. I really don't know what that was, but I've tried to look for it and couldn't find it again. I live in Melbourne, Australia, and there used to be a mental asylum called Larundel, built in 1938 but eventually closed down in 1999. I was told about this place and how haunted it was, with people hearing creepy things. I was keen to check it out. More than 10 years later, I still can't explain what happened in those 3 or so minutes we were there. It was 2011. One night, we drummed up this stupid idea because we were bored and had nothing to do. So me and 3 friends decided to go check out Larundel because, why not? The asylum at the time we went was being prepared to be demolished or renovated for new apartments. So most of the entrances and windows were boarded up with wood. The building we parked next to was surrounded by a metal makeshift fence to keep people or squatters out, and security was patrolling the grounds. One of my friends was strong enough to lift the metal fence that wasn't properly attached, which allowed us to crawl under and get inside the property grounds. It was all fun and games, and we were having a good time. You know the feeling of doing something you're not allowed to do and trying not to get caught. We were constantly on the lookout for the security officer patrolling, but we were also trying to look for a doorway inside. When we finally found one, we, one by one, walked inside. Scared shitless, mind you, we all put our torches on our phones and shined the light inside. When you walk in the door, there's a small entrance area that leads into the main room. We walked a little closer to the main room to get a better look. There were no windows that we could see, just a simple room. Mind you, this all happened in 30 seconds, so we didn't get a proper look. In front of us on our left was a staircase, I think leading up, and all the walls were covered in graffiti. We didn't see anything paranormal. It was scary enough just to be there. It had only been 10 to 15 seconds of us standing there when we suddenly heard footsteps approaching. The crunching sound of the gravel grew closer and closer from behind us. We immediately shut off our torches and were left standing there, huddled together in the darkness. We couldn't see shit. I might as well have had my eyes closed. But they were wide open, expecting something to grab me. We had our backs to the door behind us, waiting for the footsteps to hopefully walk by us, thinking the security guard must have seen us. As the crunching of the gravel was fast approaching, we all instinctively held each other's hands, waiting for the security to bust us. We stopped breathing as the footsteps came to a halt behind us. The sound was unmistakable. The crunching of the gravel stopped. We just stood there. The silence was deafening. The darkness is swallowing us. Neither of us turned around. It felt like eternity, but we stood there for about 10 seconds, waiting for something. A sound, someone saying something behind us, or a torch shining in on us from outside, but nothing. It wasn't until one of my friends turned around slowly and there was no one there. He finally broke the silence and said, "Let's get the duck out of here." And we bolted out the door and went back to our car. Neither of us saw the security as we raced out the door. We got in the car, left, and never went back. There is a nearby town where I live, about a 15-minute drive from here, that has a specific road that is supposedly haunted. It's an urban legend that I first heard in high school. Off of the main road, there is an old trail that leads to a burned down and dilapidated convent, a nunnery, that's been in the town since the early 1900s. The official story is that the building burned down back then due to an accidental fire, but the urban legend states that the priest who led the convent was practicing some pagan religion, devil-worshipping stuff, under the sisters' eyes. One day, one of the sisters found him in the basement of the small church, sacrificing a small animal to whatever evil deity he believed in and apparently muttering an incantation in an unknown language. The nun screamed and proclaimed that she would tell the entire town about this and that the priest was going straight to hell to burn. Maddened at the thought of what it would entail next, the priest killed the nun and locked her body in the basement. The next day, he invited all the sisters to a meeting in the evening, stating he had something to show them. When they arrived, he locked the doors and windows of the convent and proceeded on a murder spree, killing all the nuns who dared question his beliefs in his deity, some say using a knife, others his bare hands. Realizing what he'd just done and knowing he'd surely hang for this, he burned the convent down, but not before declaring his love to his deity and hanging himself in the rafters of the convent. Ever since then, they say that particular road has been haunted by the lost souls of the nuns, and that you can hear their wails and cries as they lament at their lives being cut in such a brutal and unjust way. If you go there at night during specific hours, the legend goes that the wraiths of the nuns follow you home unless you say some kind of prayer. A few friends and I visited the burnt-down building one night back in high school as a dare, and one of my friends started screaming at the top of his lungs, saying that he saw a shadowy, hanging figure in the rafters of what was left of the ceiling. We all started hightailing it out of there as quickly as we could, never looking back. Friends and I used to go exploring in the woods because it was the 90s and there was duck all to do back then. I found a small clearing in a dense forest with 3 abandoned houses. It was really strange, as there were no roads accessing the property, and you had to walk about 2 miles into dense forest to find them. There was a pond in the center of the 3 houses, so we would meet there and fish, drink, and smoke. Eventually we got the stones to start exploring the houses and had fun trying to scare each other. There was one big house that everyone avoided at first. It was all brick, the windows looked black, and it was surrounded by huge trees, so no light came in. We went in, looked around, and saw there was a basement down a stairwell from the kitchen. We all chickened out the first time. There is not a bit of light down there. Duck that. We came back with flashlights and weapons later on, just in case. I walked down some rickety stairs, got to the floor, and panned around with the light. There was shelving and countertops along the wall, all with jars full of stuff. As we started walking over to check them out, the stench of a rotting corpse overwhelmed us. It was probably just a dead animal, but it set off my fight or flight response, and I noped the duck out of there. We went back and fished a few times, but never went back to that house. I started driving soon after, so it wasn't really on the cards to be ducking about random forest houses. I have explored many abandoned buildings over the past 2 years, but the most scary was an abandoned mall I explored in the UK. It was late at night, and we had to do a lot to get into the shopping center as it was locked up tight. We had to somehow get on the roof through a multi-story car park. There was a 10-foot wall in our way, so we had to pile up things we found to get over it. Once we were in things that were normal routine exploration, we explored almost all of the mall. When we went downstairs to the ground floor, we heard radio noise from an office. We thought it was security, so we walked back up to where we came in on the roof. As we were walking onto the roof, my friend stopped us and said that there was a guy blocking our exit. He was wearing all black and had no security badge on. So we hid for a bit, waiting for him to leave, thinking he was just smoking a cigarette, but when we came back to see if he'd gone, he was still there, this time holding a metal pipe. We instantly knew there were no security guards and that there was probably something they were hiding in the building, so they were looking for us. We went back down to the second floor and hid in a display window that was hidden from the rest of the floor. We were there for 20 minutes, but it felt like years. Heart pounding throughout. We heard another man walking around our floor, dragging a piece of metal across the floor. At this point, we realized that we might have to either break out or fight our way out. My friend remembered that there was another door on the roof that would bypass the guy guarding the other route and would take us straight onto the car park. We decided this was the best plan to get out in one piece. We waited for the guy to leave our floor and decided to make a break for it to find the door. We couldn't rush or run as we risked the guy hearing us on our floor, so we quietly snuck around the back rooms, where we finally reached what we believed was our escape, but it was blocked by debris. At this point, I didn't care about the noise, so I started pulling the debris off, and my friend kicked the door open. We ran across the roof. I have no idea if the person saw us because I was occupied with getting the duck out of there. We got into this empty car park and made our way down to the bottom, where we saw there was another gang member sitting in a blacked out Ford Transit waiting for us to come out of the car park, so our ordeal wasn't over. At this point, I had enough, so I ran up one floor and found a fire exit to the outside. This fire exit was screwed up because the car park was also abandoned, so I basically launched myself through the door, which luckily flew open, and we got out onto the main road and went onto the street to blend into the nightlife. Less than a minute later, the van drove out, probably seeing that we had gotten out. We had narrowly escaped this gang. I had no idea what they were planning to do if they'd caught us. That day shocked me, but I'm still exploring, just being more careful with the places I choose to explore. There's a house about a block away from mine that looks identical to the one from Monster House. Very old house with small gargoyle statues by the steps. Basically, every kid in the neighborhood has broken in to look around at least once. My older brother and his friends did, and he told me stories of the house as a kid, so one day when I had 5 or 6 friends over, we decided to check it out for ourselves. Unfortunately, my story isn't anything insane because we had to rush out of there, but there were 2 things that stood out as extremely bizarre. First, there was a toilet that was fully functional and positioned in the middle of the living room. I guess the homeowner didn't like having to get up and walk to the bathroom. And second, there was an upstairs room with no way to get to it. There are no stairs, no opening where the stairs used to be, and no obvious temporary patch to block off the upstairs for any reason. There just appears to have never really been a way to get up there, but it makes no sense. We were exploring an old veterans cemetery on the outskirts of our town very late one night. We went in there looking for ghosts, with high-frequency recording equipment and cameras. It was our first year in college, so we were all about 18 to 19 years old. There were 2 sections of the cemetery. A much older, larger section, and a section full of thousands of the small, government-provided veteran headstones. The older section was what you would expect in a cemetery: old tombs, unmarked graves, and huge, ancient trees. We parked near the veteran area of the cemetery and proceeded through. Once we entered the older section of the cemetery, we started hearing voices. Of course, we pressed on, thinking they were ghost voices. Nope. Several large thugs were conducting some business deep within the larger, older section of the cemetery. As we approached, they spotted us first and started yelling something to the tune of "You shouldn't be here and you better duck and run," all while laughing like they were insane. They proceeded to run after us. We raced through the cemetery and hid behind some tombstones while we listened to their footsteps running around the cemetery looking for us. That was the scariest part, waiting to be found in the dark. Then the cops showed up. Apparently, someone had seen all the activity. The thugs went quiet and took off back towards the old part of the cemetery, presumably to get what they had left down there, where the cops were headed. While the cops and thugs headed down to the deeper, darker area of the cemetery, we bolted to the car. That was the last time we went ghost hunting in a cemetery. This story happened 3 years ago when I was 15 in my village. My village is located in a rural area that is protected by the government because it has been considered a natural paradise for the last 30 years. This means that exploration in this area is quite difficult nowadays since it is forbidden to cut trees, which means that it is a huge forest. I was spending my summer there, and my favorite thing was going hiking, although I had never gone alone into the woods, just roads with people. My grandma had told me that cleaning services had opened and rehabilitated a path that has been covered in bushes and trees for the last 30 years because of a race that was being prepared, like runners and stuff. Usually, I'd go to the nearest town, 1 hour away by foot, by the only way I knew, the road. On my way back from seeing friends there, I took the new path my grandmother said was safe alone, a mistake. The first part of the path was the easiest, there were just too many obstacles and landslides, but it was nothing compared to the rest. The second part was a hill full of rocks that was the hardest thing to go up. I literally had to climb on 4 legs like a dog. When I got to the top, I looked around and found some animal bones. I didn't pay much attention to it since the area is known for its big population of wolves and bears that go out at night. I continued my way faster than before. This part was a plain floor, where the woods really begin, so it was a relief until I got to a dead end. Some huge trees had fallen exactly in a row on the path, and it was impossible to cross them. This seems really off to me because there were no other fallen trees. The weirdest part? Aside from those 3, there was a little barn. Yes. A barn. In the middle of the woods. I thought to myself that it was probably abandoned, it looked like it, so I decided to throw my bag into the little field that belonged to the barn, and then I crossed the fence. I crossed it off without realizing the most bizarre thing. That field had no trees in it, it was clear. No bushes, no big plants, nothing. It really shouldn't be like that if it were abandoned. I started feeling concerned about how the location of the fallen trees was so coincidental, How there casually was a barn beside a clear field when that path had been closed for 30 years. It just seemed really off. I went on, and luckily, I was reaching the last hill my grandma had described, the one that connected with the village. Suddenly there was a moment of silence in the woods, which allowed me to hear some branches cracking behind me. I thought to myself that it was a bird or something, but they came closer. They really sounded like footsteps. After trying to convince myself it was probably an animal, I was so afraid I couldn't look back. I started walking faster. Guess what? So did the footsteps. I just started running after noticing that, and so did the footsteps again. I was running for my life at this point. Suddenly, I started hearing incredibly loud grunts. Everything was going really fast. Luckily, I got to my village in a minute or so after that. I got into the patio of the first house I found and closed the door. It was a relative's house. No need to call the police, lol. I stayed there for 10 minutes until I got my breath back, and then I came back home. I get chills just from remembering the place, not having a signal in the middle of nowhere, and the grunts. It makes me think there was something following me since the barn and the trees were just distractions to slow me down. I never went into the woods alone after that. I was 9 years old, and it was the week before school. I was depressed about classes starting because kids had started to bully me. My mom took me on a day trip to the local preserve. When we arrived, there was a bus load of elementary school kids, and my heart sank. I was noticeably chubby, and kids were always cruel about it. This was the 1980s, and fat phobia was intense. So we walk along the main path, full of kids. My mom could instantly charm children, so they loved her, but when she wasn't looking, the kids would say mean SHT to me. So I wandered off the main trail and found an Indian trail. It was very distinct in spite of a lot of undergrowth, passed between two trees that arced towards one another almost like a doorway, and then I came to this huge hedge, which was too high to see over and stretched all the way from the Indian trail to the main path, seeming to cut across the forest. The Indian trail led right up to it, and there was a fissure, just wide enough for a child to fit through. I peeked inside, and it was so lusciously green and cool. This was a stiflingly hot day. Nebraska heat is humid and oppressive. So it was unusual to find someplace that cool in the forest, given all the heat and humidity. I squeezed into the fissure and set my foot in the earth on the other side, which was soft, moist, and springy, unlike the hard-baked sandy earth of the main forest. What I saw remains the most beautiful place I have ever seen. The sky was pearl blue. There was a vivid green bank sloping down to a dry creek overgrown with ferns. A huge fallen tree trunk spanned the ancient creek like a bridge. On the other side was a forest of silvery trees, the most inviting thing I have ever seen. Peaceful, wondrous. All the sounds from outside were hushed. No gabbling children, etc. It filled me with joy, and at that time of my life, I had precious little that made me happy. Now, I had braced my hand on the outer wall of the hedge and had my other foot firmly planted in the hard, sandreal part of the path because somehow I knew if I put both feet on the fairy side, I could never go back. It was so hard not to walk into it and start exploring. I truly felt the place call to me, and I have never wanted anything so bad as to cross that tree bridge and explore that silvery forest. Even the air felt different, moist, and sweet. I felt a light, gentle mist touch my face as I closed my eyes and breathed in deeply. But then I thought of my mother. Could I really just leave her behind? She had a sad life too, and I thought it would be a gift to show her this place so we could go there together. Well, as I had thought, the fissure in the hedge began to close, pressing against my stomach and back. I was forced to choose, go forward or go back. I pulled myself back out of it with effort. The hedge branches caught my shirt and tore a hole. Also, a branch scraped my arm, drawing blood. I went back down the Indian trail, past the two trees entwined like a doorway, and found my mother on the main path still talking to those brats who had the nerve to bully me when she wasn't looking. I insisted she come with me to see this most glorious thing. She didn't doubt me and was willing to follow me. Only now is it really difficult to find the Indian trail in the undergrowth. It was all overgrown and covered in leaves, but I spotted it and made it as far as the two trees that were like a door. Only they were strung with nasty cobwebs, like the trees were suddenly so old and ugly that I couldn't imagine going near them. And the trail had disappeared entirely. I looked up and pointed in the direction of the hedge, sure she could spot it from there. It was 9 feet high and stretched for several yards in both directions. But no. There was nothing, only the usual trees and undergrowth. My shock when it wasn't there. I saw then that it was impossible that it had ever been there. It would have bisected the main path, which was packed with children and teachers. I was speechless, trying to get my mother to understand what I saw. She didn't doubt me and said, maybe it was just for you to see. I felt such a profound sense of loss. really an inconsolable loss. Probably, at the end of my days, I will still think of that place. That was my chance to enter the fairy realm, but I turned back.